Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. It is 18 after 8 o'clock, and our first guest standing by, and that is, of course, you, Phapano Phasha, Chairperson of the Center for Alternative Political and Economic Thought. We are looking at the there was an article that had suggested that South Africa's youth are trapped in a failing education system. Now, recently, Minister Gwede Mantashe had suggested that South African youth are possibly lazy and passive. But the article that I'm referring to has suggested that the South African youth have been systematically disempowered by design. And of course, I think we as parents too are up in arms about the fact that there is this suggestion out there. But let's hear what Phapano Phasha has to say about this matter, knowing that parents, there's a statement as well suggesting that parents are conditioned to celebrate a 35% pass rate subjected to a curriculum detached from the digital, technical, and entrepreneurial skills required in the 21st century. And of course, what happens? Obviously, it then throws these disempowered youth into an economic that deems them totally unemployable. Phapano Phasha, a very good morning to you. Welcome to the program.
And good morning to your listeners as well.
A cause for concern, is it not? Because as you and I speak, we do know that the youth unemployment rate in our country is exceptionally and unacceptably high. And if it's not addressed, we're sitting on a ticking time bomb.
Of course we are, but what has been of interest to me is the fact that many of us will speak of unemployment, but we don't speak about how the jobs must be created and who these jobs or who must create these jobs. But over and above it, to question why, if our education system is producing so many graduates, why these graduates are themselves not part of the job created. So that has been of interest to me because we primarily speak of unemployment as if it must automatically happen, as if someone out there must just automatically produce this job.
So clearly, civil society looks towards government to set the agenda and to create, and very especially, with the fall of apartheid, expectations were high amongst us as Black people. And then when we look at our education system, we'll come back to the issue around the graduates as well, and we're going to also question the type of degrees that are being offered at tertiary level. Are they meeting the needs of the South African youth? But also, the other question to be looked at is that the government elite have their children obviously at private schools. They are then educated to become leaders and hold high profile positions in global companies, etc. But the rest of our kids that just manage to get through with a 35% pass rate are those kids that fall through the cracks. And I guess that too is one of the very important questions. Why did we as South Africans not push back when the then Minister of Education had suggested that 35% would be an acceptable pass rate? What are we telling our kids by having made that statement and making that an acceptable norm in our country?
No, thank you so much for the questions that you pose. And that is exactly what I attempt to pose in the article, because I raised some of the points that you've raised, but then I ask the questions to the parents to say, why are you silent and passive observers when you vote in a government or when you have a government in power that subjects you to this level of mediocrity. So for me, I think it's what has, as I said, been of interest to me. But in the article itself, I speak of a dual education system that you alluded to. The very fact that the majority of the people are subject to this type of public education system that nobody questions, and they take their own children to this private school where the outcome is completely different. Now, you then tend to ask yourself, does the government not even look at the return on investment? Because you cannot pour so much money into an education system that produces what I call human despair. So those are the things that do not make sense. For some, the conclusion could be that the system wants to produce voters who can think. It wants to produce and to increase the number of people who are in social grants or who are on social grants. Because if you then do that, it means what you just have is you just have a group of voting cows, people who are hopeless, people who are helpless, people then who can think innovatively and creatively. But then what also happens is that you have a short push of the middle class, and this middle class has to then take care of all the people, of the millions of people who are products of this inept education system. And quite interestingly, just recently, the leader of one of the opposition parties, Musi Maimane, took the matter to Parliament. The country was not part of the debate. I'm not sure if it was the fault of Musi Maimane or the Honorable Musi Maimane for not engaging the public, adequately. But the reality is that parents are very passive themselves. They're not involved in the future of their children. But lastly, on this matter, if you look at the statistics, especially the research that was done by the Center for Risk Analysis in 2018, it then so poses a risk factor and a race factor where it says that it's primarily learners of Black African descent who are prone, to be subjected, or who are prone to fall off the system and so on. Whereas children of Indian and white descent are likely to succeed, and it's because some of the reasons that they give is because there's a lot of parents' involvement, but over and above that, the parents are able to take, to escape, to ensure that their children escape from this system. So, there are different factors at play, but I think fundamentally it's primarily because society is actually passive, but then you have ministers who then come in who clearly are not scientific when they blame young people who are products and victims of this education system, which for decades has been alluded to as being highly mediocre, as not in line with international standards. And no one has actually done anything about it. So, I'll stop here for now.
Undoubtedly, our government has failed us miserably as the people of South Africa, the children and the future of South Africa, because we're stuck in this very mediocre education system where 35% pass rate is good enough. And is this what government is telling its people? That this is the level that is acceptable? It's a crying shame to think that this is what government thinks about us. Government always talks about, people power and entrepreneurship, and people need to rise to the occasion. People need to make the opportunities for themselves. But how can you do that if the children are so poorly educated? They're definitely going to fall by the wayside. And there are a whole lot of other factors at play here as well. This is because of our failing education system, and the elite just close their eyes to it. This is and has, in fact, opened the very dark doors to a very high crime rate in the country, for ongoing corruption apart from top levels of government, but starting right from grassroots level. There's crime and corruption at every level in society, simply because of unemployment. If people were meaningfully employed because they had a good enough education, we wouldn't have half the problems we have that's facing the country currently. Your thoughts, Phapano?
That is so true. But then what needs to be done? Because you do have these millions of young people that, as you rightly said, they've been pushed into the world of crime. They've been pushed into this world of corruption with no solutions in place. What needs to happen? And just recently, I've been observing what the racist Afro Forum movement has been doing for its own people and to resolve the crisis that has been created by our own government. So they're not watching hopelessly and helplessly for the government to come and save them. So they are creating institutions for these people who would then be able to survive in the system. So there are so many, as you said, wrong things that are happening in our society. I mean, research has also come out that 1 in 3 South Africans understands what is artificial intelligence. I mean, just recently, for example, and I just want to be practical, the G20 that was in South Africa, all these world leaders were talking about critical minerals. And these critical minerals, of course, are part of what is called the semiconductor war or the chip war. South Africa, in this conversation, primarily talks about beneficiation, but we do not talk about the processes that involve this type of industries, which are critical for modern economy. So there are many things that are wrong, but I believe that there could be intervention, because as a people, we can no longer wait for a government that has no clue on how to resolve the challenges of society, but at the same time, that cannot do scenario planning where they are able to envisage the type of society that is needed to solve or to resolve modern day problems. I mean, you are dealing with a crop of leaders that just want to take from taxpayers, leaders, who are immune from corruption, who are numb from corruption. So I think we must just accept that as a people, we cannot wait for the ANC to come and save us. We must save ourselves.
It all seems to be totally dependent on us as a people, whilst the corrupt leaders continue enriching themselves, and they have one commission after the other further eating up all of the taxpayers' hard-earned money from the time that the ANC has come into power. There's just been commission after commission after commission after commission, but absolutely no or very little out any action being taken against the perpetrators or the corrupt officials that were involved in those commissions of inquiry that was in fact investigating them. In the meanwhile, over the past 30 years, taxpayers' money have been eaten up in all of these commissions and all the rest of the corruption happening in the country. And very sadly, our youth are suffering the brunt of all of this with a very mediocre education system in place. Let's look at tertiary and then we'll wrap up. Are our tertiary institutions matching up to the requirements within the country? Are they offering the type of courses that will enable graduates to go out into the workplace, find meaningful employment, and like you said right from the outside, outset, perhaps they then have the skills, the education, and the backing to be able to create employment for the masses in the country?
No, thank you so much. I don't really think that the academics who have been in academia for decades are themselves equipped or knowledgeable on what is happening globally. Of course, theoretically, some of them will speak of artificial intelligence, for example, but they might not be privy to some of the practical applications of what is happening. And I also speak from experience because I come from academia, and I was lucky because I used to organize events where we would invite business just to come and engage us on skills that are needed. And continuously, the business sector would say that the graduates who are being produced in South Africa are not fit and proper. That is why we continuously, as I said, produce graduates who are looking for jobs, graduates who are not job creators. So the high institutions of higher learning themselves are part of the problem because the academics themselves are not practically aligned. If you were to take, they themselves, in fact, are at risk of losing their jobs to artificial intelligence. So there are cracks in the system, and there is agent intervention that is needed. But then you are also talking about policymakers who don't even have a clue about what is happening in the world and the changes that are taking place and the necessity for innovation and critical thinking. So what we're having is that we are producing graduates and learners who can think. And by the way, that is the ultimate goal of any education system, to produce a nation of thinkers. And unfortunately, our education system and our educators are not doing that. Compounded to this is the role of trade unions. Trade unions are not playing a progressive role in the country. They are also not, in line with what is happening globally. So there are so many things which are not going right, which is quite unfortunate. But lastly, we do not even have a lot of, if any, political parties which are then propagating for an education system of the future. So for me, this are gaps that should be filled. Someone should raise these issues and then be able to mobilize society, because the crisis in our education system is not new. We know that learners in South Africa, research has proven that many of them cannot read, many of them cannot write. Many of them, especially from rural provinces like the Cape and Limpopo, still do not have proper toilets. It's said that 1 in 4 of schools in South Africa has a library or has a lab. So there are serious gaps in rural provinces. We know that the money that is meant for education primarily goes towards tenders. It does not go where it's meant to go. The money that is meant to resource learners goes to individuals. It does not really go where it's meant to go. That's why, in fact, we must also scrutinize and question when Treasury says that it will allocate billions or some money to the education system, because what you find out is that once you take out the salaries, once you take out the money that goes to the tenders, there's minimal that is left that really goes towards educating young people. The sitters themselves, sitters are not really being optimized to ensure that they skill, not even skill, but they reskill as well as the litany of graduates who are just sitting at home with qualifications that they cannot use and not being able to think creatively on how do they stand up and be part of the human capital that is needed.
Okay, Phapano, that's where we have to leave it. I hope that by way of this paper that you have written and by way of this interview, we get deep thinkers starting to apply their minds and be able to engage with government to start changing our education system. But thank you indeed for your input. Lovely chatting to you till the next time. God bless.
Thank you so much.